growing in terms of population, economy and motorization. Because of this rapid increase, the number of accidents that occur as a result of people failing to fasten their seatbelts has also increased. We can see that every car that was manufactured had to have a seatbelt. Seatbelts are created to keep people in their seats and thus prevent or reduce injuries in the event of accident. On January 1st, 2009, the Malaysian government began enforcing the rear seatbelt policy. Malaysia implemented a rear seatbelt policy after 30 years of enforcing the law for front passengers. Seatbelt violations will result in fines for both drivers and passengers. Any passenger, front or rear, who fails to wear a seatbelt will face a fine of up RM2,000 or a maximum of 1 year in prison.
Policy problem. Malaysia has the highest road traffic mortality rate 100,000 people among ASEAN countries in 2017. This problem followed by Myanmar 24, Philippines 21, Thailand 18, Laos 17 and Indonesia 16. Countries such as Laos and Indonesia outperform Malaysia in terms of number of persons killed on the road. Unbelt rear passengers are responsible for around 350 fatalities in Malaysia. However, the rate of accident in Malaysia still not critical. According to observational research, rear seatbelt use was at least 10% lower than front seatbelt in every year. Myros conducted a study on the rate of rear passenger wearing seatbelt, and it was discovered that only 7.7% of back passengers attached their seatbelt. Aside from that, according to the Road Safety Council, rear seatbelt is almost non-exist in Penang. This seatbelt policy to minimize casualties. Previous study has indicated that wearing a rear seatbelt to lowers the number of people killed or injured in car accident. Not wearing a seatbelt not just danger of harm to rear seat passenger but also the risk of injury to front seat who may be crushed by unbelt rear seat passenger in car accident. Purpose of this policy is to minimize the number of traffic accidents in Malaysia and discover factors with rear seat passenger and seat belt usage. Following the multi-nominal logistic recognition analysis, there were several questionnaire responses containing about rear seat passenger response that those who were younger, male, single and less educated and less experienced in driving were potentially do not wear a seatbelt. This indicated that drivers are more likely to adopt the same seatbelt wearing behavior as rear seat passenger they may do when drive. Government has made a significant step by making it mandatory for rear passenger to wear seatbelt beginning on 1st January 2009. And then, people who do not wear rear seatbelt may be compounded RM300 Malaysia, and those who refuse to acknowledge the new law may face RM2,000 Malaysia fine and in prison for up to a year or both under the Road Transport Act.
The main objectives of the policy mainly to reducing the risk of fatalities and injuries from car crashes. Next, rear seat passengers are less likely to get hurt, reduces the risk of front passengers being crushed by unbelted rear seat passengers in the case of a car accident, and lastly, reducing the number of traffic-related deaths. The National Advocacy Campaign in Malaysia was launched in June 2008 with the purpose of increasing public awareness and understanding about the importance of wearing a rear seat belt. The Malaysian government has used a variety of methods to raise public awareness about the necessity of wearing a rear seat belt by advertising on the television, radio, banners, stickers, and community-based activities. This campaign can be said to focus on children as the majority of the accident cases involve the lives of children. Therefore, the government also makes campaign at several primary schools to explain the awareness of wearing rear seat belt. During the second year of the National Advocacy Campaign, enforcement officers strictly advise and gives warnings to make sure people buckle up their rear seat belts. At the same time, the government also re-encouraged the use of the front seat belts. Malaysia's government began enforcing the rear seatbelt policy on January 1, 2009. The rear seatbelt policy in Malaysia was implemented after 30 years of the law for front passengers being enforced. Unbelted rear passengers in motor vehicles will fine of Ringgit Malaysia 300 Ringgit, which increased to RM2,000 Ringgit, and or having to face a 1-year jail sentence of both. Vehicles that were built after January 1, 1995 but do not have a rear seat belts were given until 31 December 2011 to equip their vehicles with rear seat belts. The policy's goal is to control passenger behavior in terms of wearing rear seat belts in order to effectively reduce the number of road fatalities and serious injuries caused by car accidents.
Chairman of Malaysian Institute of Road Safety, MAIROS, Datuk Suraj Singh said rear seatbelt usage among Malaysian road users is still very low. This despite regulation having been in place since 2009 based on observation. According to studies, if the driver and passengers in a vehicle are involved in a road accident, the risk of death can be reduced by 50%. So, a strategic plan for the installing of rear seatbelt must develop as a starting point to educate and increase awareness and stage the importance of using seatbelt. In 2020, the Ministry of Transport YB Anthony Loke has announced starting 2020, passengers who don't have a rear seatbelt will be fined in 300 ringgit. The Malaysian government needs to make a new regulation that compels all passengers in bus and coach to wear rear seatbelt. This can be significant reduce the number of road fatalities. Furthermore, the policymakers should also include the car rental services in this ruling, as they might experience a similar situation like any other ordinary cars when involved in a road accident. The government should help so that road users are not burdened with mandatory measures to wear seatbelt. Government assistance does not include financial incentive alone. They also need to help in controlling the price of seatbelt installation. In short, the government assistance is very important if we want to encourage consumers to wear seatbelt. All Malaysians, especially the government and the media, must work together and implement efforts to encourage the use of rear seatbelt among road users in Malaysia. If the measure of wearing seatbelt is supported by all Malaysians, surely the number of road accidents in Malaysia can be reduced.
Evaluation on the effectiveness of the policy. Alright, the first one is strengths. Rear seatbelt policies are strong since they are the primary means of the safeguarding our people's life. Previous study has indicated that wearing a rear seatbelt lowers the number of fatalities and injuries caused by car accidents. Next, wearing a seatbelt reduces the risk of harm not just to rear seat passengers but also to front seat passengers who may be crushed by unbelted rear seat passengers in the case of a car accident. Despite the benefits of using a back seatbelt, it is rarely used in Malaysia. The purpose of this study was to determine what factors are associated with rear seatbelt passengers in Malaysia wearing seatbelts. A multinomial logistic regression analysis of the results of a questionnaire survey of 1651 rear seat passengers found that those who were younger, male, single and less educated, as well as those who had a negative perception of law enforcement, a lower risk aversion and less driving experience, were less likely to wear a rear seatbelt. There was also a high correlation between wearing a seatbelt as a driver and as a passenger. This implies that drivers are more likely to observe the same seatbelt restriction when riding in the back seat as they do when drive. These findings are essential for developing new tactics to increase rear seatbelt compliance. Seatbelts are the strongest line of defense against drunk, aggressive or inattentive drivers. Being strapped up helps keep you safe and secure within your car after an accident. Being totally ejected from a vehicle is nearly always fatal. Next is a weakness. Drivers who wear seatbelts are less inclined to take risks, which is a flaw in current public policy. This might lead to an increase in more serious accidents, lowering or eliminating the use of seatbelts. The phrase seatbelt syndrome refers to how they can sometimes result in accident-related injuries. Seatbelt fibers may cause injuries to the chest and abdomen in a variety of situations. It has the potential to cause more serious internal organ damage, such as ripping off the colon or diaphragm. In certain cases, the lumbar vertebrae may be crushed or dislocated. Seatbelt usage is lowest among young and elderly car passengers. Forgetfulness, a sloth or perceived minimal danger of damage and pain are the causes. Furthermore, in addition to speeding and running red lights, adolescent drivers frequently demonstrate this unsafe driving behavior. This is due to their lack of decision-making ability as well as their adventurous nature. The variation in seatbelt usage based on seating position were mostly determined by risk perceptions. Front right seat passengers feel exposed, vulnerable and uncomfortable because they believe they will be affected if they are not strapped in the case of an RTC. That is, they may suffer varied degrees of injury or death because of expulsion. This high-risk belief encourage front seat passengers to wear seatbelts. Rear seat passengers, on the other hand, feel comfortable and secure since they believe they are less likely to be engaged in frontal RTCs due to their distance from the site of contact. Furthermore, only 13% cooperated with wearing a seatbelt. According to a survey conducted by the Institute of Road Safety Research, the compliance rate of wearing automobile rear seatbelt is alarmingly low, MIROS. When the law was first implemented in early 2009, it had a 47% compliance rate, but by the end of the year, it had dropped to 13% following years. Compliance with rear seatbelt rules remain continually poor, with 9.7% in 2010, 9.2% in 2011, and 13.5% in 2012, 12.5% last year, and 7.7% so far in 2014. The extra weight of the rear passenger who is not wearing a seatbelt might cause significant damage to the front passenger indirectly. Next, opportunity. The independent components investigated as well as the temporal effect are the rear enforcement. Result according to our data, the RSB intervention reduced the number of patients who sustained serious and minor injuries by around 20%. Conclusion changes to the RSB law have had a substantial impact on health outcomes. In addition to lowering the number of injuries, furthermore, this legislation has improved the quality safety system of the automobile, such as seatbelt alarm and rear seatbelt reminder built into the car. Previously, persons who failed to use their seatbelt did not realize they were not securely buckled. Moreover, this policy increased the quality of the seatbelt on the buckle, as well as design adjustments that allow for better access and operation, such as the release button being situated on the top of the buckle. Significant decrease in unlocking efforts required when the belt is loaded, allowing a person locked in his seatbelt in a rollover automobile to free himself by applying normal pressure to the release button. Following that, on the comfort spots, reduce belt pressure on the shoulder without reducing strap, storage capacity or wearing clearance. Belt efforts needed for strapping the belts can be reduced by improving the performance of the retraction mechanism and lowering belt deployment friction outside the retractor. And next one is threats. This rear seatbelt policy is not appropriate for youngsters, since children under the age of 10 or 12 are unlikely to meet the height and weight requirements to safely use a seatbelt. As a result, youngsters who must wear a seatbelt are more likely to do it properly. When these variables are present, the efficacy of the constraint is considerably weakened. In the case of an accident, a child wearing only a seatbelt is more likely to be thrown from the car. Severe injury or death is a possible result. Then, there's retractor failure. A seatbelt retractor is where the belt is fed from and is in charge of locking up during unexpected stops. If the retractor fails for any reason, the passenger will not receive the necessary protection to avoid significant damage in the case of a car collision. In addition, the latch failed. A seatbelt latch is the point of contact between the buckle and the belt. When the latch fails or comes undone with applied force, a passenger might sustain catastrophic injuries in the event of a car accident. Next, spooling. Spooling occurs when an excessive quantity of the seatbelt fits out, indicating that there is insufficient belt to securely restrain the passenger in the event of a crash. During a car crash, a lack of proper restraint might result in serious or even fatal injuries. Victims of major vehicle accidents are frequently unaware that a seatbelt failure has happened. As a result, it is critical to call an expert who can accurately recognize the indicators of seatbelt failure following a catastrophic automobile accident. The seatbelt will also cause damage to our bodily parts such as our ribs, chest, shoulders, abdominal area, bruising and lacerations because of the energy from the sudden halt when an accident happens.
In this section, I will explain about the recommendation of rear seatbelt policy. The rear seatbelt policy is the main point in protecting, secure and concern for car drivers and play a very important role as it aims to reduce the injured and death in the event of a road accident. Therefore, this policy is formulated to reduce the number of deaths each year. According to the analysis, the effectiveness of this policy is 40% until 50% for the reduction in terms of case of death, severe and minor injuries involving passenger in the back. One way is that the government can hold a campaign or carnival related to the rear seatbelt policy. The purpose of this campaign or carnival is to expose the community, especially teenagers who are less sensitive to the importance of wearing a seatbelt and the disadvantages of not wearing a seatbelt. This matter is not taken lightly as it involves a human life. Besides that, the Royal Malaysia Police PDRM must cooperate with the government in enacting a new law related to the use of seatbelt. This is because there are a handful of people who take this matter trivially and easily. Therefore, the Royal Malaysian Police (PDRM) will impose penalties or fine on offenders who do not comply with the instruction. This method is also one of the alternative ways of warning offenders and the public. Next, the Royal Malaysian Police (PDRM) can check on every driver and passenger by setting up roadblocks or placing cameras that can scan. If any driver or passenger in the back of the vehicle is not wearing a seatbelt, it can make a fine of them. Based on the problems encountered in intimidation are the quality of seatbelt and the size of seatbelt for children. In overcoming this problem, the government needs to ensure the quality and the size of the seatbelt because it will ensure the safety of drivers and passengers. According to my reading, material are suitable fabric of the manufacturer of seatbelt is webbing fabric. The webbing fabric is made of polyester and the fabric is very strong and do not easily broken. The conclusion that can be made is that in the success of a policy or law is a support from every community in Malaysia. The community must obey and abide by every instruction given. In addition, superiors also must not be biased towards offenders. This often happens because there are a handful of police officers who accept bribes from the offenders with the recommendation of a lenient punishment. In this case, the police must be firm and not be taken lightly. Furthermore, the government can participate by listening to the opinion and voice of the people in road accident reduction.
Based on the Malaysian rear seatbelt policy, it was discovered that this policy can reduce the severity of injuries for rear passengers. Seatbelts are also classified as one of the vehicle's safety features because they can have a significant impact when passengers wear them, whether in the front or rear. Based on the facts described, the seatbelt resulted in a significant reduction in accidents when the rear seatbelt policy was enforced. All parties should be concerned about wearing a rear seatbelt because it can save loved ones' lives. In fact, wearing a rear seatbelt is neither inconvenient nor cost-effective. Every individual should practice this behavior so that they feel unsafe when not wearing a rear seatbelt in a car.